I've never been nervous to film a video before, but I'm so scared. I believed in the real presence view of communion. Jesus teaches it. How could I go against that? I just didn't like the vibe of Catholicism. I wanted to be anything but Catholic.
Hey guys, it's Lizzie. So today is my 4-year anniversary of becoming Catholic. On March 31st, 2018, at the Easter Vigil Mass, that is when I was confirmed and became fully initiated into the Catholic Church. So I thought it would be so fun today to rewatch my video from 2018 called Why I'm Becoming Catholic from an Ex-Protestant and see what I think about it today. I have not watched through this whole video in years, so I'm really excited. Okay, here we go.
My heart is beating so fast. I've never been nervous to film a video before, but I'm so scared.
This is so real. I was not just saying that to be dramatic in the video. I remember my heart was beating. I was like shaky. I was so scared. I thought I would lose a ton of my YouTube subscribers and I would have to stop doing YouTube full time. Really nervous about acquaintances and people who I grew up with in church or I knew from college finding this out. I had been running Lizzie's Answers for 8 years and I was Protestant the entire time. I made a ton of Christian videos. So I literally thought this was going to tank my career.
And have been putting this off for so long.
That is so true. I'd been keeping it a secret for almost a year. I knew in April 2017 that I was going to become Catholic or Orthodox. It's just something so intimate and private and I wasn't ready to share it yet.
Hey guys, it's Lizzie. So this is really happening. And I want everyone to know that I hated that this was happening. I fought so hard to get out of this intellectually. I did not want to be Catholic.
This very first part was quoted on radio stations and Catholic articles, and I wanted to start it off like this. This was the most important part, and I was hoping that my subscribers for years were gonna watch this and would become Catholic with me.
Not only did I think Catholicism was wrong, I just didn't like the vibe of Catholicism. I wanted to be anything but Catholic.
So many people were confused by like the vibe of Catholicism. I got so many questions on it. I guess I just didn't like Mass and just a lot of things about it initially.
This isn't like I was dating a Catholic guy and we were in love, or I loved Mass.
Literally, people at my college who were becoming Catholic, some of them were in a relationship or had an ex who had become Catholic, and so I always like doubted their sincerity, which is so judgmental and wrong in so many ways, but I wanted it to be clear to everyone that that wasn't me. So everyone knew this was an intellectual decision, not clouded by any emotions.
It vibed with me spiritually. No, I did not want to convert. I loved being Protestant. I grew up in a church called Church of Christ, and I was about to move to Thailand to be a missionary for that church for 3 to 5 years.
That was one of the saddest parts because every summer of college, I lived there for the summer and they were like my family. It felt like home. I loved Thailand more than America and that was my future. That was devastating and such a heartbreak. I really wanted to emphasize in the video how much of a sacrifice this was. This wasn't, I hated Protestantism, I was looking for another church. It was only because of truth.
I still miss Church of Christ. I still listen to Church of Christ hymns on my phone. I was doing that this morning during my devotional time.
I would walk back from Mass and listen to Church of Christ a cappella hymns on YouTube in my headphones.
I literally am about to start crying thinking of how hard it was to have to tell my parents that I'm becoming Catholic. A lot of people have been pushing me to come out about this.
I'm literally almost crying in this video and it's completely real emotions.
Because people have suspected, and the reason I haven't wanted to is because my YouTube channel is public. Everyone in my personal life knows about it, and I don't want all these people from my college or from my churches growing up who poured into me spiritually to know this because it comes across as betrayal.
That was so hard. It felt like rejecting everything they'd given me, not being grateful, betraying them. Even my scholarships in college were Church of Christ, and even though I wanted to convert a year after college, I felt guilty for that too, that they'd like invested tens of thousands of dollars into my education and then I leave them. I felt horrible. I had this huge loyalty to Church of Christ.
Is true meaning that it is the early church, the apostolic church, that it goes by the Bible more than any other type of Christianity. I think of truth as a dartboard, and I think all the types of churches are around this.
I don't know if
bullet
I still think of truth as a dartboard. Maybe I do. Have you guys heard of that? I used to talk about this all the time.
Are around this bullet point and are Christian and are so close to truth. But I think that the doctrines and dogmas of Catholicism are closest to truth.
I chose to include this because I knew there would be thousands of Protestants watching it, and I wanted them to know the Catholic view on Protestants.
And me being American just makes it that I fit into Protestantism so much better. But I was willing to be wrong. I was willing to change. I was willing for truth to be something so uncomfortable, for truth to be something that I hated. I just wanted to find truth, whatever it was. So I researched myself into this since last February. I've just been obsessively reading and researching, just researching so much into what Christianity actually was in the early church.
I was actually off my bipolar meds at the time, and I was definitely in a hypomanic, borderline manic episode, and so I would just read and read and read with a higher processing speed because I was manic. It was such an intense time and also so amazing. It was so fun getting to know all the early Christians and becoming like family with them, because you read the Bible your whole life and you get to know those people and they feel like Christian family. But I was able to read the early Christians and really have a feeling of who they were and friendship with them. Catholicism as a whole felt so scary, but knowing individual saints of the early church, it made me feel safe.
I learned growing up that Church of Christ goes by the Bible and is the early church. Those were the most important things, that we were being like the early church, that we were going by the Bible.
I have met so many Catholic converts who grew up in Churches of Christ because being the early church is the most important thing you learn from childhood, and so it's such an easy jump to be Catholic once you read what the early church really believed.
I was shocked. It just looks Catholic. And I started reading Protestant scholars, atheist, agnostic scholars, no Catholic scholars.
That is so true. I did not read just a book by a Catholic theologian or a Catholic apologetics book for months. I was very against being like manipulated by a Catholic, even though I wouldn't think of it that way today. It's honestly such a relativist epistemology view where I thought that someone part of Catholicism couldn't be objective, even though if someone converts into Catholicism who grew up Protestant or atheist, it's because they found it to be true. And so they don't stop becoming objective because they became Catholic. But at the time, I was like, they're biased. But it worked out. Even from the Protestant, atheist, agnostic perspective, they admitted and were teaching enough of what really led me to seeing Catholicism as early Christianity.
I was reading the Church Father writings, which do come across as really Catholic, but they're not something that Protestants would call Catholic sources. So I read primary documents. I'm gonna link right here a website and below where you can read the Church Father writings.
Ooh, ooh, so all my Protestant followers could go read and research.
The only tenable explanation of the development of Christianity in the early church is that the original church was the Catholic Orthodox Church in dogma. But there were a few basic things that were paramount, central to the early church that I only see today in the Catholic, Orthodox, and Oriental Orthodox churches. The early church believed in something called the real presence view of communion. These are just some basic quotes from the church fathers talking about
really long quotes.
It's very obvious that the early church believed in the real
Another
presence
page
view of communion.
Wow.
And the most
I hope a lot of people pause the screen there.
in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, during the Last Supper, Jesus literally says, "Take, eat, this is my body, drink, this is my blood." So John is the last gospel to be written in around the year 90. And so there were so many heresies starting up in the early church almost as soon as Christianity began.
Wild.
John decided to be really explicit to make the real presence doctrine obvious. And so that's where the bread of life discourse comes in John 6. For me, once I saw that so many church fathers believed in the real presence view of communion, After that point, I sat down and I read John 6, and this was the night before Easter of last year.
Isn't that so cool? So the Easter Vigil of 2017 is when I believed in the real presence, knew I would have to leave Protestantism, and then a year later on Easter Vigil 2018, I was confirmed. So cool.
And I remember I had just flown back from Virginia from visiting one of my friends. We'd gone to a Byzantine Catholic Good Friday service the night before. And I remember sitting on my bed in my bedroom and reading John 6.
So cool. I literally preserved the comment. I remember this so vividly. I actually prayed for God to reveal himself to me so strongly. And then I was just randomly on YouTube reading comments. Someone left this comment telling me to read the Last Supper accounts and Synoptics and John 6 and everything, and I saw the meaning for the first time. I was literally sobbing.
I'd actually read a comment on a video I just uploaded, and one of you guys, my subscribers, told me to read all of the communion Last Supper accounts. And when I read this, I started crying, like sobbing, because I saw the meaning for the first time.
That was one of my favorite memories ever.
And it's crazy because I had just been reading through John, but it's interesting because the church you grow up in completely influences the way you read the Bible. The bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. At that, the Jews argued among themselves, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? They had the same reaction that I had my whole life, that so many Protestants have towards the real presence communion dogma. Even at the time, they thought it sounded crazy. So it's chill if you also think it sounds crazy.
It is very emotionally validating reading that and realizing even right when it happened, it was hard for people to believe. So of course, it's hard to believe today.
Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you do not have life in yourselves. Anyone who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. Because my flesh is real food and my blood is real drink.
That's the most intense and shocking verse in John 6. Jesus literally says, my flesh is real food, my blood is real drink.
He just keeps going and going, yeah? The one who eats my flesh and drinks my blood lives in me and I in him. Therefore, when many of his disciples heard this, they said, this teaching is hard. Who can accept it? See, they have our same reaction. And so he goes on, and then some people literally leave because they can't accept this doctrine of the real presence of the Eucharist.
They didn't just walk away from Jesus speaking to everyone, they were no longer his disciples. They completely left Jesus.
So this was the leading thing pulling me into continuing researching, continuing to read more and more about the early church. I believed in the real presence view of communion. Jesus teaches it. How could I go against that? And the Greek towards the end of Jesus saying 4 or 5 times, eat my flesh, drink my blood, is gnawing, chewing, like really graphic language to mean that he means it literally.
Okay, so I made a video a couple years later, John 6, and I want to play a clip from it for you.
After all of this, they think Jesus is being literal. Even Protestant scholars admit and accept that trogo, chewing, gnawing, munching of raw vegetables grasped by animals.
Isn't that amazing the way I edited it? People tell me whenever I receive the Eucharist, I hear in your voice, trogon, 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 as they're receiving the Eucharist.
Trogon, 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 crunch and munch and chew and gnaw on my flesh. The reason I'm choosing the Catholic Church over the Orthodox Church is because of Matthew 16, the papacy. We're gonna read that right now too, and I'm just gonna explain the exegesis of the way the Jews at the time would have understood it. And this has nothing to do with Peter being the rock. Obviously, I think Peter is the rock, but a lot of people debate that and it just becomes a crazy argument. So we don't even need that to prove my point about the papacy.
That's so smart if it's super complicated and Protestants won't accept it. Just focus on another argument.
And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the force of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth is already bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth is loosed in heaven. So a subscriber sent me this like 2-hour lecture by this scholar. His name is Stephen K. Ray. This is his book, Upon This Rock That Goes.
This book actually sold out on Amazon after this video because it got so many views and so many people bought it. Also, a few weeks after this, I was doing a radio interview on a Catholic radio station, and they brought Stephen Ray to talk to me live on the radio. It was so cool getting to thank him in person. He also wrote me an email about this, welcoming me into the church, which was so sweet.
On this rock that goes into so much depth on the papacy. When Jesus says, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, this wasn't a cute metaphor. So at the time, in the Jewish monarchy, there was a second in command position who was second to the king. This second in command dude literally wore...
Second in command dude. This is so funny how I use such casual language to talk about this, which I think is so good because a lot of people find theology really boring, and so I think you really need to make it fun and use fun words to vibe with people.
The keys to the kingdom around his neck. I'm not kidding. And this is literally in the Bible. There's so many Bible passages about this in Isaiah, in 1 Samuel. But what's really important is to understand that we're reading this from a 21st century perspective. So we're like, oh, sounds like a cute metaphor. But at the time, a Jewish first century audience, when they hear, I will give you the keys of the kingdom, that's Jesus telling Peter that he's the second in command position. It's political terminology. That's how the Jews at the time would have heard it. There are like 72 other arguments.
Okay, so I think that's maybe the most important thing I said in this video, that we can't go into reading the Bible and reading early church writings with American, Western, post-Enlightenment, 21st century, postmodern perspective. You know, like this was 2,000 years ago. And I think all the time we don't realize how we need to have such a huge cultural awareness to really understand it.
This is why I'm becoming Catholic over Orthodox. A lot of people have been asking. And just the history of the Roman bishop in the early church.
And I still get this question all the time. I get that question, and I think it's because I talk so much about how I wanted to become Orthodox over Catholic, and people are like, if you really were so drawn towards Orthodox and passionate about it, why didn't you choose it? Because they're so similar. But obviously it does come down to the papacy, how we understand the role of the Roman bishop.
So what's crazy is that this second in command position, if the king ever left, this second in command dude was in charge of speaking for the king, like making decisions, saying things. He was in charge. He was...
That's the only thing I could think of to say. Making decisions, saying things.
The leader if the king was going away. And if the second in command guy with the keys to the kingdom, literally they walk around carrying like the giant keys on their shoulders, then that guy was replaced by another guy. So it's the coolest thing ever because Jesus goes
Coolest thing ever.
away to heaven, and the second in command position dude is in charge, and then when he dies, he hands on the keys to the kingdom of heaven to the next guy, etc. The other crazy thing, when I heard this, I was like, wow! So people don't...
I want to play that again. That was so cute.
When I heard this, I was like, wow! So people don't like how Mary is a big deal in Catholicism. And to be honest, it's something that still makes me uncomfortable emotionally.
For like 2 years after this, it still made me very emotionally uncomfortable. Because my whole life, I was taught all these things about what Catholics thought about her. They were worshiping her. And so it's really hard to just like get out of that emotional place. Just because my whole life, I was taught that Catholics were worshiping Mary. So emotionally, it's something that's so difficult to get over. Anyway, so in the Jewish kingdom, guess who the queen was? It was the mom. Sorry, I'm yelling. It was the mom of the king. It wasn't the wife of the king. So Mary is the queen of heaven because she's Jesus' mom. We have to understand what the first century Jewish audience would have heard. So those are just the two basic reasons that I'm converting to become Catholic. Yay! That's such a good video. So the most astounding part of this video is that I uploaded it thinking I would lose a ton of subscribers and I wouldn't be able to do YouTube full-time anymore because I wasn't making enough income because a ton of people left my channel. So I was absolutely right. I lost thousands of subscribers, but I also gained thousands of subscribers of Catholics, of Catholic converts, of Orthodox Christians. So it was very interesting. I think the day after this was uploaded is when EWTN published an article on me. I was getting dozens and dozens of emails for interview requests, hundreds of comments, DMs. It was such an intense time. That week, I cried so many times out of stress and just being overwhelmed. And of course, everyone was being so loving and encouraging and like, welcome home, welcome to Catholicism. But having all of that all at once, suddenly overnight, was wild and so intense. It was also really, really sweet. Thank you guys so much for watching. So on Easter Vigil of this year, I'm going to upload a video reacting to my confirmation video where I share the footage of me being confirmed, receiving the Eucharist, and just sharing my whole experience in being confirmed. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!